Can I please invite the chairman of the panel, Jonathan Powell, to bring the panel members forward. Gerry Adams, Lord Alderdice, Dr. Seamus Mallon, Professor Monica Mcwilliams, Peter Robinson and Lord Trimble. Please give them a warm welcome. How are you? Okay, let me tell you something about these people, none of whom need any introduction, but we'll do it all the same. Jonathan Powell, who's chairing the panel, is an honorary professor in the Senator George J. Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice, and director of Intermediate, the charity he founded in 2011 to work in conflict resolution around the world. He was Chief of Staff to Tony Blair and the Chief British Government Negotiator on Northern Ireland from 1997 to 2007. Gerry Adams was the leader of Sinn Féin between 1983 and 2018 and has been a TD for Louth since the 2011 election. Lord Alderdice was Speaker of the Northern Ireland Assembly between 1998 and 2004, leader of the Alliance Party between 1987 and 1998, and since 1996 he's been sitting in the House of Lords as a Liberal Democrat. And back in the 90s, some of you here may remember that he lectured in the Faculty of Medicine right here at Queen's. Dr. Seamus Mallon was First Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland between 1998 and 2001. He was also the Deputy Leader of the SDLP from 1979 to 2001 and spent almost 20 years as an MP for Newry and Armagh. Professor Monica Mcwilliams is an academic and former politician, co-founder of the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition. In June 2005, she was appointed Secretary of State for by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland as a full-time Chief Commissioner for the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. Peter Robinson was First Minister of Northern Ireland from 2008 until his retirement in 2016. He was leader of the Democratic Unionist Party from 2008 until 2015, and he's been involved in Northern Irish politics for over 40 years, being a founding member of the DUP, along with the late Reverend Ian Paisley. Lord Trimble was the First Minister of Northern Ireland from 1998 to 2002, and the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party from 1995 to 2005. He's the former MP for Upper Bann and was made a life peer in 2006. And he is a former Professor of Law here at Queen's. He is now in the Lords as a member of the Conservative Party. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel.
Thank you very much, Yvette, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We've got very little time, I'm afraid, for this panel, so I just want to make 2 points to start us off. The first is that I'm really very proud indeed to be on this stage with these 6 Northern Irish politicians. As George Mitchell said, these are the real heroes of the peace process. We could come and go, we could get on planes, we could leave. They had to make the sacrifices, they had to make the compromises, they got the Good Friday Agreement, got the St Andrews Agreement, and got the thing working. And I am really proud to have worked with them, and I think you should all be very proud of what they contributed to Northern Ireland. The second thing I want to say, rather more prosaically, is that we have exactly 40 minutes because we have a hard end, as you heard from the helicopters, to this panel. And I've been given the impossible task of getting 6 politicians to talk in a total of 40 minutes. I think getting the Good Friday Agreement was considerably easier than doing that. We're also supposed to cover the past and the future. Why did the Good Friday Agreement succeed when the previous attempts at peace had failed? What made it work? Why has it kept going? And what does the future look like? How are we going to get a new generation of politicians to get the executive back up and running, to make those compromises again, and to make it work? And how are we going to deal with the challenge, the threat of Brexit and the hard border, and the threat that makes to the Good Friday Agreement and the working of the peace process? So I'm going to be really ruthless, I'm afraid, in terms of allowing people to speak. If anyone goes over 4 or 5 minutes, I'm going to interrupt them and cut them off, because otherwise they're taking away time from other people. So I apologise in advance for being John Humphreys and rude. I want to start with Seamus. Seamus wrote in the Irish Independent today about Sunningdale, why Sunningdale failed, and of course famously said that the Good Friday Agreement was Sunningdale for slow learners. And there's an interesting question of why it wasn't possible to get to an agreement in Sunningdale was possible in the Good Friday Agreement. And I think there may be lessons from that in the future as well. So Seamus, if I could start with you by asking you why you think the Good Friday Agreement worked and what your lessons are for it succeeding in the future.
Sunningdale, of course, was a much better deal for nationalists than the Good Friday Agreement. And yet, we had one section of nationalism blowing it out of existence. And we had the sight of a British Labour Secretary of State buckling in the face of men with cudgels and balaclavas on the streets. That's why that administration ended. The lessons there, the lesson of that is that somehow or another in the Good Friday Agreement, we got our approachment between unionism of David Trimble and Peter and nationalism. I would like to pose one question. And I'll do it now because you'll not give me any more time.
You're right.
There's the overriding political, philosophic question that was hovering around the Good Friday Agreement was parity of esteem, justice. I believe there's an issue now that has to be faced. No more ambiguity, however constructive. Let's look it straight in the eye, and I'll do that now and ask the question, what can we, nationalists, the nationalist community, do to allow unionism to breathe without the threat of constitutional change that they don't agree with? What can we do? That's the question of now. I suggest that one of the first things is to very openly look at it. It's interesting, in the previous discussions, everybody was from an urban situation. I come from the hills of South Armagh, which have different problems. But I want to be able to persuade unionism that Irish unity would be a good thing for us and them. I can't do that. I can't do that if they're afraid, if they can't breathe, as someone said earlier, if this threat is always there, sometimes openly and sometimes not, that they don't belong here. And I had an experience once. A man I knew well, good man, shot dead on his tractor. I learned that his family had farmed for 400 years. And he was shot dead because he was a member of the British occupying forces. He was a reserve policeman, 2 nights a week. His blood, as he died in the field, come down to his soil. And I asked this question: was that Irish soil or British soil, or was it the soil of people who belong in this island? That's when we'll start to breathe. That's when I can go and pursue my aim of Irish unity by peaceful means. It will require courage. It will, the gainsayers will have a field day, will be accused of changing the goalposts again. But you know, look at what could be done if, in effect, we, this time, the nationalist community, making the unionist people feel part of this island, part of the land on which they farm, part of the country that they belong to. I do not care as that poor man's land. I don't care what they call it, as long as it is one name, home. Let's do that.
Thank you, Seamus. Thank you for setting the tone for the session. David, I remember you saying to me some 20 years ago that you expected politics in Northern Ireland to develop in an ideological direction after the Good Friday Agreement rather than remaining identity politics. That hasn't happened. What happened with the Good Friday Agreement and how is it going to be saved for the future?
Well, actually, part of the reason why it hasn't happened is because the party that you're associated with did not take the necessary steps to bring in normal politics. Right? And that means bringing in, for the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, who are having such a bad time at night across the water that they might as well come over here. But to be serious, that is moving away from the politics of identity to politics based on socio-economic matters does mean having the full range of political advice available. This hasn't happened. The local parties, the SDLP, Ulster Unions, even the DUP, can't do it by themselves. They do need the national parties to be present. And I have no objection to there being an Irish National Party as well, so that full gamut is available. So if you want to see that sort of move, that's the sort of thing you need to do. But to deal with your first question, which you answered generally about why these talks succeeded where others failed,
yep.
You left out the Anglo-Irish Agreement of 1985, which was the epitome of what not to do.
Yep, my brother's fault.
And at least London learnt from the experience and realised that if you're going to have any success, the agreement has to be made by local people. The people who are affected by it must be the people who make it. And without that, you have no hope of success. So that is one of the things that were crucial. The other thing which was crucial is that we managed one way and another to cover enough of the issues that were of vital importance to each of the parties so that each of the parties could then endorse the agreement, even though some of them took a few weeks extra to make up their minds. That's another matter. So you've got, I think, those two particular elements, that the agreement, or what you're doing, actually meets the essential needs of the principal players, and having it done by local people is absolutely essential. Now, we managed to do that. We actually managed to solve some rather awkward problems along the way.
And what is the lesson, you think, from that for the new generation of politicians? How do they get the executive up and running again? How do they save the Good Friday Agreement?
Well, I don't want to get in too much into that because the whole thing's clouded by references made to Brexit. Now, notice I'm not saying that it's clouded by Brexit. It's clouded by the references people make, and people are, I think, misinterpreting and misapplying it. There is no connection, threat, or anything of that nature between the agreement and Brexit. They're things that are operating on different planes entirely. And I think we would do everybody a benefit if we focused properly on these. It'll not actually, my own view...
So hold it for a sec.
I'll hold it up now. All right. It is my own view is that I think the Brexit issue is going to come to a conclusion quite quickly now. David Davies in the papers today is talking about before the end of this year. I think it'll come quicker than that. You probably notice yourself how, in terms of these negotiations, there comes a point where the pace starts to accelerate. And I've got that impression with regard to this, that we're in for a bumpy ride over the next few weeks on this front because we've got to get the withdrawal bill through Parliament. And I shall have some late nights in that respect, well, maybe early mornings as well. But once that's through, I think things will accelerate and we'll have things sorted out. Hopefully, we will have an arrangement which meets the essential needs of the major parties.
Okay, thank you. Monica, you've been around the world seeing other agreements, other peace processes, and all of them admire the Good Friday Agreement. They're all looking for inspiration from the Good Friday Agreement. Why did it work in 1998, and what do the new generation need to learn?
Well, Jonathan, first you've said it's a tall task because you've been long enough here to know that people from Northern Ireland can't say hello in 5 minutes, never mind give you a good considered answer. But I think it was to do with the process, the substance, and to do with enforcement. Those are the lessons. The process was inclusive. There were parties there affiliated previously to armed groups. And I want to pay tribute here today to one of my very good friends, David Irvine, who I became a really good friend to as a result of that process. Sitting down, getting involved in a dialogue, back-channeling, working behind the scenes at times of crisis when they were put out, and working with Sinn Féin when they weren't in. There were civic society actors involved at the table, which we've now learned in other processes are much needed. And there were the constitutional parties, those are the ingredients. But we had good chair people at the talks, and I want to pay tribute today to George Mitchell and to his colleagues General de Chastelan and Prime Minister Holgreave from Finland. Third parties are needed. The Norwegians went to Colombia. In fact, you yourself were also there building on Northern Ireland. And likewise, the two governments. We had superb officials and we had superb statespersons. You see Paul Murphy here, and again, let's pay tribute to Mcwilliams, who's passed on, and Liz O'Donnell. And the Irish officials who are here, and the British Northern Ireland officials, take a clap on the back. You sang from the same hymn page as we were working on that agreement. Get back now with Brexit and sing again and try your best to bring us out of this current conflict. So that's the process, the substance, hard issues, and indeed the constitutional arrangements, the governance arrangements, the institutional arrangements. But the beauty also of that agreement is in the Taoiseach's speech today. How to remember, how to renew our spirit, and how to build ourselves back up and believe in ourselves. To me, that's what we should be celebrating today, 20 years on, and we have so many ways sustained that. The spirit went out of it. I keep referring to Good Friday 20 years ago a bit like a baby. As a mother, I would. We went through the hard labour. We produced this beautiful, magical document, which was words, but we needed to nurture it. We needed to care for it. We shouldn't drop it. So trying to be brief, that substance was good, it was comprehensive. And we promised the people that we would go out there and sell the good bits and the bits that we also didn't agree with, the pain and the gain. And that's what you do as a negotiator. So my message is that we tried to make it. And to the young people at the back with the school uniforms, over to you to make sure that you can make it too, and don't break it.
Jerry, the same questions to you. Why was it doable in 98 when it wasn't doable in 73? And what are your hopes about the future of this agreement and keeping it going and getting the executive running again?
Well, first of all, there were 20 years of covert negotiations, contacts, dialogue, leading up to the Good Friday Agreement. So a lot of work was done by people like John Hume and Father Alex Reid and Des Wilson and others like that. It was a far better deal than the Sunningdale Agreement. It's about equality. Equality is noted under our protocols 21 times in that agreement. It was also got at a time when the DUP weren't present. It was got at a time when the Ulster Unionist Party wouldn't talk directly to Sinn Féin. So let's bear all of these things in mind. It was substantial and remains substantial. We can, of course, look at the fact that the institutions aren't in place, but the institutions weren't in place when that agreement was made, and in fact were quite dysfunctional for some time after the agreement was made. And we had all of the elements that other speakers have spoken about, the chairpersonship, the different people who come into the international community. So let's then reverse for a moment or two. When we argued for international support, when we argued for a scrutiny internationally into the problems here, we were told, no, these are internal matters for the governments of the United Kingdom. And yet, when we got that support from all the people who come in, it worked. They brought their expertise, they brought their neutrality and their objectivity, and they applied themselves. Secondly, if we look at what has occurred since, by any measurement, this island is in a better place. By any measurement. If you can take it in the context of the number of people who are alive, who may have been dead, the number of people who don't have to visit graves, who never visited a prison, who never experienced a shooting or a bombing or a house raid or a search or a beating in an interrogation centre, the number of young people who have actually got potential to live their lives. So it is not possible to make peace by one event. And George Mitchell said to myself, and God rest Martin McGuinness, and he may have said this to others, when we had made the agreement, he said, well, that's the easy bit. The hard bit's going to be implementing it. And that is very, very, very true. So as one of the people in this platform who are still deeply involved, and who has been deeply involved for a few decades before the Good Friday Agreement, and all of those big issues we dealt with, putting arms beyond use, policing, justice, armed groups, and all of those changes since, I think the Good Friday Agreement remains a template for the future, that we just don't look back and pick over it and say whatever we want to say about it, but that we actually look forward and we say that the principles in this agreement, and I read them last night, the 5 or 6 main principles, they are as relevant today, and they will be as relevant in 20 years from now as they were 20 years ago. And all parties, in my view, should unequivocally and unconditionally embrace that agreement. There is a very dysfunctional society here. Let me give you my view of it. We are going to come to 10, so we're going to come to 100 years of partition. By any measurement, partition has failed. By any measurement, however you look at it, it has failed. Some people here mightn't like to hear that being said. It isn't that long ago since this was a one-party state. That's no longer the case. It isn't that long ago since this was an orange state. That's no longer the place. And I think, and I hope this is taken in the spirit that is meant, it is more difficult to be a leader of unionism than it is to be a leader of any of the other political parties. Because to be a leader of unionism, you have to embrace a notion that rights are good for everyone, that equality is good for everyone, that we all live here, that this is our place, and we can all shape out the future together. And I think that's a huge challenge. It's not as big a challenge for people like myself and Mary Lou MacDonald or Michelle O'Neill. It isn't, you know, it's still the most difficult negotiation. It's still always with your own side. But if you fear change, if you think equality works against you, you know, how come an indigenous language in Scotland has a Scottish Gaelic Act? A native language in Wales has a Welsh Language Act. In the south, we have an Irish Language Act. We don't have it here. How come this is as British as can be, unless you're gay or lesbian or want to be married to someone from your same gender? How come we have no Bill of Rights? So I just make the broad case that we need to understand, proactively listen to each other, and I'll finish on this point. We had a draft agreement with the DUP leadership a month ago. The DUP leader's here. I think she acted in good faith. I've done all of those negotiations up until the 8th of February. For whatever reason, the DUP couldn't embrace that draft agreement. Now, it wasn't a done deal. Nothing's agreed till everything's agreed and so on. But it was. We were satisfied, and if I may say so, I think the negotiating team from the DUP were satisfied that we had the best that could be done at that time. And Michelle O'Neill dealt with all the other parties that were represented in the Assembly. So we haven't got that deal for whatever reason. But it's not going away, you know. We're going to come back to these issues. All of these issues remain issues of unresolved rights. And when we get all of that out of the way, then we can start to really be friends with each other. I met two young women out there born in the year of the Good Friday Agreement. I said, "What do you think of the future?" One of them said, "The future is bright." I believe for. I think the future is bright, and I think that's what the new generation of leaders should make happen. A bright future, importantly for those who have suffered during the conflict, importantly for the victims and those who have been bereaved, but especially for the young people who deserve better than what we had when we were young.
Thank you. Peter, you weren't actually in the building for the Good Friday Agreement, if I remember you were outside. But you contributed a huge amount to working to get the St Andrews Agreement and really did do a major part of that process. Why do you think that process, taking Good Friday and St Andrews together, worked? And what's your advice to your successor on trying to get this up and running again?
Well, thanks, Jonathan. I think perhaps first of all I should thank Queen's University and the George Mitchell Institute for the invitation. I recognise that I'm probably not a comfortable or easy fit into the circumstances that we're in. I feel as if I've stepped onto the stage at Act 3, Scene 4 of Macbeth. But then again, when I look to my right, perhaps I'm taking part in all our yesterdays. And it is good to see some literally old faces like myself with the grey hair. I think that while overwhelmingly either the Unionist community initially opposed or later became opposed to the Belfast Agreement, there was still a central spine of that agreement and of every agreement that has come subsequently that was about partnership, about the recognition that there had to be a compromise, that we had to work together, that in a deeply divided society you couldn't operate on the basis of victory or defeat. And I think that whatever you might say about the Belfast Agreement in negative terms, and I could say plenty, the reality is that out there it presented to many people, though mainly nationalists, hope for the future. And I think that's an essential ingredient as we look at the differences that there are today. In some ways, I'm encouraged by the kind of issues that we're arguing about now. We're not arguing about the kind of context that Seamus was outlining about death and destruction on our streets. We don't have the same constitutional uncertainties about today. We're actually dealing with fairly normal policy matters. And I just hope that, and I think it's slightly unfair, Jerry, to talk down to Arlene, who isn't in a position to answer herself from when you're on the platform and she is not. But I have absolutely no doubt that both Arlene and Michelle are capable of doing a deal. I have absolutely no doubt about that. I'll go further than that. I think eventually they will do a deal. Now, that requires nothing other than the will to find resolution to problems. You're always going to face problems. They will seem insurmountable at times. You might have to manage them before you solve them, but ultimately I believe we can get there. Because whether we, as a group of politicians and past politicians, are prepared to face up to it, the electorate out there have a very significant role in any agreements that are reached, because they can give the politicians the encouragement and, more than that, the flexibility to reach agreements. And I think there is a real role for the public to play, because as I sense it, and I'm more with the public now, away from the ivory tower, and I do get the feeling on the ground that people don't want this no man's land that we have, which is neither devolution nor direct rule. They don't want direct rule. They want devolution. They want their own politicians who are accountable to them to be in charge, because they know best the nuances of what's needed here. So I think we do need to have a revisit. I don't want any, what Jim Mulner used to call, high wire acts. I don't think that serves our present circumstances. And if anything has made it more difficult, it has been the he said, she said, the leaking of documents, all of that stuff over the last number of weeks. The leaders of our parties have to be able to have exchanges in confidence, knowing that it's going to remain in confidence until they agree it should be otherwise. So and rather than attacking them, criticising them, I want to encourage them. That the public, I believe, is behind you if you can go on to forge that agreement. And I said to one journalist earlier on, in many cases, you have to make the problem bigger in order to solve it. Mm-hmm. And I think a more broadly based agreement might be necessary, so that there can be more of a give and take for both sections of the community. So it might seem strange, but I think when the agreements are being revisited, I think you have to look at bringing other issues in order to resolve it. I don't think you can simply go back and say, here's where we were, now let's finish it off. I think it's going to have to be slightly different than it was the last time round.
Thank you very much. Encouraging. John, being in the middle in the Alliance Party or as Speaker or as Lib Dem is never very comfortable, but it does give you a good opportunity to sum up why you think it worked then and what you think the lessons are for the future.
I think the first thing that was really important, it's been mentioned by other colleagues, is that we moved from an analysis that said the solution will be found by bringing the broad mass of people in the centre together and marginalising the people on the extremes, which did not work, to a recognition that everything had to be inclusive if it was to have an opportunity of moving forward. That didn't mean everybody had to be at the table all the time, but it did mean everybody had to have an invitation to be at the table all the time, and that was really, really important, and it hadn't happened before. The second thing, which is incredibly important, not just for us, but for people in any situation of conflict, was the discovery, the recognition that our problems were problems of disturbed historic relationships between communities of people. Not just between individuals, but between communities. And we looked at what those relationships were. They were between Protestant Unionists and Catholic Nationalists in the north, between North and South, and between Britain and Ireland. And the whole peace process was constructed to address those relationships with the appropriate people involved in them. When you're talking about relationships, it's very important to understand that once you've signed the marriage contract, that's not an end of the business. Indeed, if you think it is, it's more likely the end of the marriage than the end of the business. It's a matter of working at and building upon the relationships. And where we have had difficulties, it is when we have fallen back, not so much in terms of what we've thought, but how we've felt, which is what relationships are really about. And there are three elements in that. You get these disturbed historic relationships, first of all, when one or more than one group of people feels under existential threat, that all that's important to them is going to be wiped out or is in danger of being wiped out. Secondly, when people feel a deep sense of unfairness in the way that they or their community are treated. And thirdly, and this is the most toxic of all, when people feel deeply humiliated and disrespected as people. You can forget disagreement, you can overcome unfairness, you can reassure in the case of existential threat, but people remember personal and historic humiliations for the whole of their lives and often into the next generation. And if we're going to find a way forward, and I think there is every possibility, and I share this optimism, that there is every possibility that some of those who are down there rather than up here will be up here in a number of years' time demonstrating why they succeeded in rebuilding and repairing and developing and enriching those historic relationships that we tried to work on. And they will succeed if they can reassure each other that they are not under existential threat from each other. If they can ensure that it is a fair society for everybody. And most importantly, if in politics, and it may seem very strange for some people to think that politics could be characterized as this, because in politics in the world today it's not, but it's crucial that political leaders and those who follow them treat each other with respect rather than disrespect and humiliation. Because once one side starts treating the other side with disrespect, it's responded to in kind, and you get into a vicious, literally vicious cycle. And so I do feel a sense of optimism if we can return to understanding it's not a zero-sum game of politics. It's not even about agreements, except agreements that allow us to disagree without killing each other. It is about building the relationships. And I remember George saying, before he left, he said, I want to come back in many years' time, and I want to sit and watch the assembly, something he can't do just at the moment, and I want to hear them arguing about policy issues. But peace will be taken for granted. And I think Peter's right when he says the divisive issues at the moment are much more issues of policy than principle. And if we can rebuild the relationships, we can rebuild our community together.
Okay, I'm going to be ruthless with you, Seamus. You have 1 minute and counting from now.
Thank you, Jonathan. I have to disagree with Peter. But a fundamental issue, it isn't Hamlet or Macbeth that we should be looking at. It's the last act of Hamlet. And I'd like to pose this question. As all the old bodies are lying about dead, the question is, who is young Fortinbras?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and we've achieved a miracle. We've ended on time with 6 politicians, which I think is unheard of. And what's more and more important, we've actually ended up, at least I've ended up, feeling more optimistic about the Good Friday Agreement, and that if any of us were still alive in 20 years, we could still come back and be ready to celebrate its 40th anniversary, and it would still be working. The compromises would have been made by a new generation of politicians, and we would have a success. So join me in thanking this panel of 6 very wise and brave people. Thank you.